Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Lantos family and foundation, it is my great privilege to welcome you, and especially our honoree, Irwin Cotler, to the presentation of the 2023 Lantos Human Rights Prize. My name is Tamika Tilleman. I serve on the board of the Lantos Foundation, and I am Tom's eldest grandson. Before we begin today, I'd ask you to join me in a moment of silence for the victims and families affected by the abhorrent attacks of October 7th. And if you feel so moved, please offer a silent prayer for the safe return of the 222 hostages taken that day and the protection of all innocent lives impacted by these events. Thank you. We convene today at a moment of crisis, a time when surging tides of anti-Semitism, inhumanity, and violence threaten the foundations of free societies everywhere. The last few weeks provide what may be the most consequential moment in our lifetimes to affirm the importance of human rights. From the kibbutzim of the Negev to the fields of eastern Ukraine, this is a time for choosing, a time when we must choose to defend the norms of decency and democracy that continually arrest humanity's descent into barbarism. In Washington, Ottawa, Kyiv, Jerusalem, and capitals across the world, we must join together and strengthen the common architecture of values that unites people of goodwill in the mission of building a more humane fellowship with humankind. That cause was the life's work of my grandfather, and it is the life's work of Irwin Cotler. Irwin has left an indelible mark. He has served in the halls of power as Canada's Minister of Justice and Attorney General, and in civil society as leader of the Raoul Wallenberg Center for Human Rights at McGill University. But his legacy is defined less by the positions he has occupied than by the people and principles he is championed. He is a hero for our time, a voice for the voiceless. And while he was selected as our honoree many months ago, I cannot think of anyone whose legacy is a better match for this moment. Irwin, we are joined today by members of the Diplomatic Corps, leaders in civil society, and members of Congress. Having reviewed the list, I can tell you that virtually everyone here to honor your life and work deserves special acknowledgement. But I would ask you all to join me now in a round of applause to welcome our special guests. We appreciate both your presence here today and your shared commitment to the values that have defined Irwin's work. Our program will run as follows. After a brief video tribute, we will hear from my mother, Annette Tilleman-Dick, then Representative Jim McGovern and Ambassador Robert Karstens, the Special Presidential Envoy for Hostage Affairs. Following Ambassador Karstens, we will have the presentation of the Lantos Prize and remarks by our honoree, Irwin Cotler, and finally the Foundation's president, Katrina Lantos-Sweat. Thank you to our speakers, the incredible team at the Lantos Foundation who worked miracles to make this event today possible, and each of our guests for the work that you do to carry the banner of human rights.
Human being is created in the image of God, and that freedom can never be taken for granted.
In April of last year, my husband, decades-long opponent of Vladimir Putin, was arbitrarily arrested, charged, and tried for high treason for condemning the Putin regime's bloody and criminal attack against Ukraine. Since that day, I've been incredibly blessed to have Professor Cotler fiercely fighting for Vladimir's release, by my side.
Dear Irwin, Mazal Tov. It's not the first prize that you get, and you deserve all of them. But I think that the first prize which connects your name with the name of Tom Lantos. It's so appropriate.
Irwin was introduced to me in the British Parliament. We met on the patio overlooking the Thames by a member of the British Parliament who said that you should meet this guy, Irwin Cotler. He's really special. We sat down, I introduced myself, I told him the story of Sergei Magnitsky, and I told him how we were trying to get the Magnitsky Act passed in different countries. And Irwin said, you should come to Canada. And from that moment on, Irwin became a friend, a collaborator, a partner, and somebody who I would say Irwin single-handedly navigated all the politics of Canada to get the Magnitsky Act, the Canadian Magnitsky Act, passed unanimously by both houses of Parliament in 2017.
Irwin is grounded in reality, strong in spirit, and resilient in adapting to the ever-changing character of an unchanging threat. He knows that freedom has to be defended with his life, and that it has to be for everyone, in keeping with the core Jewish obligation to love the stranger as yourself, having yourselves been strangers in the land of Egypt.
Your devotion, your idealism of human rights and freedom were matched with your stubbornness and unbelievable professionalism. And then I met Tom Lantos, and immediately understood that you are really kindred spirits.
Congratulations, my dear friend, on receiving the Tom Lantos Human Rights Prize. As did Tom, you light a fire for justice in some of the darkest corners of the world, and you give all of us a sense of hope.
I have no words to express my gratitude for his strong commitment and his precious counsel, but most of all, I would like to thank him for his incredible kindness and patience in guiding me through this hell of a journey, which is the fight for the life of your loved one. For his words of encouragement, for his unwavering belief that we will be victorious because our cause is a righteous one.
Irwin has energy like I've never seen. He's got morality and passion like it's nobody's business. And every project he takes on, he brings a force and weight and gravity to the situation that really brings hope to so many people.
Welcome. My name is Annette Lantos Tillerman-Dick, and we are so happy you've joined us today. My father came to Congress late in life, but he found the principles that guided him there in his youth. As a teen, during the Holocaust, Tommy Lantos learned a lesson as painful as it was profound. Darkness can snuff out light with vicious efficiency. You must carefully tend your own moral flame if you hope to help keep the world illuminated. When my father and mother came together to Washington, because they did everything in Washington together, their constituency quickly surpassed the borders of California's 11th District. Within my parents' offices, those suffering under persecution, no matter their race, nation, or creed, found someone who listened to and cared about the injustices they faced, someone who believed them and would fight on their behalf. Since my father's passing, the Lantos Foundation for Human Rights has honored his legacy by celebrating those clear-eyed individuals who recognize and fight for the right thing, regardless of the prevailing pressures or political fads. Winners of the prize hailing from Asia, Africa, the Middle East, Europe, the U.S., and this year Canada demonstrate an unwavering, unwearying commitment to principles of decency and democracy in a world too often shrouded by greed, hate, and evil. Bright torches In the recurring nights of human suffering, these champions bring light and clarity to the darkest human struggles. How desperately we need that light today. The past years, the past weeks increasingly, have been dimmed by a thickening fog of senseless violence and unrelenting animus. The cruelest atrocities, bearing the most bitter fruits, have been hailed by some as righteous, and others met by others with silence. The rest of us fear that years of polarization and rancor have left too many unable to discern right from wrong. At such times, darkness threatens to overwhelm us. It is at these moments when we must look for those bright points shining out from the haze of equivocation. It is by the light of those who hold high their torches of truth that we reorient ourselves, pointing our noses towards the right thing and fighting for it. The recipient of this year's Lantos Prize, the Honorable Irwin Cotler, bears that kind of light. From his advocacy on behalf of prisoners of conscience, such as Saad Eddin Ibrahim and Nelson Mandela, to his clarion condemnations of injustice at home and abroad, Irwin Cotler has devoted his career to beating back the creeping reach of autocracy and repression. Furthermore, he has laid out with sober clarity the ways in which darkness insinuates itself into our communities and our perspectives, naming hate for what it is and offering us tools honed by his lifetime of action, tools which we can use to combat hatred. Another torchbearer here today is Congressman Jim McGovern. As the co-chair of the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission, he has carried the flame lit by my own father 40 years ago, ensuring that oppressed peoples always have a listening ear and a powerful advocate in the U.S. Congress. Thank you for being such a steadfast light, Congressman, and thank you for coming to share your words with us today. Before I yield the dais to Congressman McGovern, I'll make one last plea to each of you. As we admire the light cast by the great luminaries present here, may we be illuminated. May we recommit to brightening the flames of our own torches and to driving back the darkness of ignorance and hate with the light of love and truth. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Annette, and I want to also thank Katrina. I'm honored to be here with Ambassador Carstens, and to Micah, thank you, and I, with all this going on in the world, I can't think of a place I'd rather be than here, because when I look out in this audience, I see so many people who have dedicated their lives to doing good, to standing out loud and foursquare for human rights. And as I was watching this video, I was thinking of the late Tom Lantos, who I had the honor to serve with very briefly, and who I miss, especially now with all the political noise, with all the partisanship going on. He had the ability to cut through it all and not only speak truth to power, but to do so in a way with incredible moral clarity. And with the world on fire right now, we need more voices like that of Tom Lantos. And I am honored to be here to congratulate our friend, Professor Irwin Cotler, on receiving the 2023 Lantos Human Rights Prize. This is a well-deserved recognition for a lifetime of work on behalf of human rights and the pursuit of justice. You know, human rights is a huge field. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which frames all human rights work, is expansive, and there are many ways to advocate for the rights it lays out. One approach to defending human rights is to defend the human rights defenders, the people who advocate for victims of human rights abuses, and work to change the conditions that allow those abuses to happen. Anytime there has been progress in human rights defenders have played a key role. But all too often, human rights defenders find themselves at risk when they document and report abuses, or when they press governments to live up to their rights obligations. All over the world, human rights defenders are threatened, attacked, imprisoned, or even killed for doing this work. Professor Cotler excels in defending human rights defenders, in particular those who have been imprisoned. He has brought his legal skills to bear on behalf of some of the world's best-known prisoners of conscience, among them Nelson Mandela, Chinese Nobel Peace Laureate Liu Xiaobo. And for many years, I've admired his work to free Raif Badawi, a Saudi blogger and human rights activist, unjustly imprisoned for daring to exercise the right of freedom of expression. We all celebrated the day Raif was finally released from prison, even though he continues to be subject to a travel ban that has kept him apart from his family. And Professor Cotler is still on the case. Alongside his work in support of prisoners of conscience, he is well known for speaking out strongly and consistently against anti-Semitism around the world. The Raoul Wallenberg Center for Human Rights, which he founded, is inspired by the Swedish diplomat and humanitarian who saved thousands of Jews from German Nazis and Hungarian fascists during the later stages of World War II, including Tom Lantos. It is especially fitting to recognize these contributions as we struggle to come to terms with the horrific terror attacks carried out by Hamas on October 7th and their aftermath, the death toll that increases daily and deepening despair. In this devastating time, we must act with moral clarity and compassion. We must demand that the hostages be released, and we must seek a path forward that protects the safety of both Israelis and Palestinians. And we must fight anti-Semitism by building common cause. You know, the first person to receive this prize was His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And I was just reading through some of his writings, and he reminded us that peace is not just the absence of war. He said peace can only exist when human rights are respected, when people are fed, and when individuals and nations are free. And I think we all need to keep that in mind as we continue to fight the good fight on behalf of human rights. You know, I used to have a history professor in college who used to end class by saying the same thing all the time. He would say, remember, the world will not get better on its own. And class dismissed. And I'll be honest with you, when I took his class, I didn't know what the heck he was talking about. But I do know what he meant now. Nothing gets better. Nothing changes for the better. Human rights are not advanced unless good people, like-minded people, come together and fight to make it a reality. And Professor Cotler has been a towering example of a human rights advocate that has made such a difference and saved the lives of so many people. So I am honored to be here, and I look forward to our paths continuing to cross, and look forward to working with you in the future and helping uplift human rights all around the world. Many, many thanks. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm very honored to be here today. I'd like to give a special thanks to Katrina and Tanette for inviting me. I'd like to thank everyone who works with the Lantos Foundation for all the hard work that you do, not only in today's event that we're now enjoying, but also for your continued efforts to continue the vision and legacy of Tom Lantos and your commitment to change things around the world. As you said, Congressman, the world does not change on its own, and I commend the Lantos Foundation for all the work that you're doing to make those changes. I just want to just say a few shout-outs in the room. Anais, where are you? Hey, how you doing? The daughter of Paul Recessi Regina. think of Jenny, who we saw up on the screen there. Are you also in the audience today? Okay, Marissa, good seeing you as well. Didn't know you were right behind me. The good news is that when you come to an event like this, you're really surrounded by your friends. You know, I think David Crane's hiding out there. I'll find him later. But these are the people that we really, there you are. It's like the soldier that you were. You're hiding in plain sight. We're surrounded by our friends, people that care about these topics, and it's important that every now and then we get together and honor people like Professor Irwin as a way of establishing the importance of what we're doing, because sometimes it's hard to actually find whether you're making any success in this world. Obviously, there's a lot going on in the world with things and events happening in Israel. I'm grateful, at least to say, from the State Department side of the House, that the Secretary of State, of course, has been very active in trying to address this crisis. So I've been to Israel a few times since it started. The President of the United States is currently involved, as you very well know, and been very active in trying to bring people home. And as the Special Presidential Envoy for Hostage Affairs, my role is to work on getting all those who are currently held back to their families. And thankfully, I can tell you that I enjoy the strong support of the President of the United States and the Secretary of State in these efforts. Currently, you might ask why I'm even here. Well, I'll tell you. I have a team that's forward in Tel Aviv right now working this issue, and we also have are linked up with members throughout the interagency, foreign governments, foreign militaries, other diplomats, in an effort to try to push this ball forward and bring people home. But no matter how bad it gets, I think it's important to know that the Secretary cares, the President cares, and of course, naturally, we all care. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. Now, my role as the hostage envoy, our job is to run the diplomatic efforts to bring people home from captive environments, whether that's someone being held by a terrorist group or someone that's being held by a nation state. We've helped in this effort by the efforts of the U.S. Congress, most recently in the passage of the 2020 Robert Levinson Act, which gave us a set of criteria with which to evaluate whether someone was being held wrongfully or not, and also providing us with a sanctioning authority and clear ground rules as to who can do what within the U.S. government's approach to bringing people home. I'm mindful, however, that it's not just the U.S. government that gets this done. It's really a community of people like us. Not only do we have, I would say, members of the U.S. government involved in these efforts, but whether it's the State Department, Department of Defense, Central Intelligence Agency, et cetera, but we also call members that participate in this from Capitol Hill, senators, congressmen, their staffs, NGOs like the Lantos Foundation, individuals like the recently passed away Governor Richardson, who was a titan in the world of bringing people home. And together, all of us together, find ways to get this very hard job done. In fact, if I may, Katrina was actually pretty tough on me during the 2-year period we were trying to get Paul Rusesabagina home. I still have scars on my body to prove it, and I enjoyed every one of them because that's what you need. You know, there's a community out there that at times has to be tough on the U.S. government to make sure that you're holding us accountable and pushing us, even though knowing that we're also pushing as well. And I would say, Annalise, I would also say I have a few scars from you as well, if I may. So I think what's important, at least as far as what we're doing here, is I guess the focus on the rule of law and trying to establish norms. As I said, something's going on in Gaza. We're working to get people home. That might be the tactical thing that we're working on. That's the thing that's right in front of me. But what makes taking hostages as a tool of diplomacy go away? It's working on a multilateral coalition of people who can build the norms, the rules, the organizations that can one day put this to an end. I will recall when the Secretary of State one day put his hand on my shoulder and said, Roger, start working on a multilateral effort to make sure that countries around the world can call out this horrific act and make it go away. He goes, victory for us is in 10 to 15 years we have to dismantle your office. That's what I appreciate so much about Professor Irwin Cotler and all the work that you've done. You can actually, and you have, stay in the tactical fight, making sure that someone gets out of prison. At the same time, all your work, to include anything from writing books to participating in multilateral organizations to your work in Canada as a minister, it's all also fighting the long-term fight to make sure that some of these problems eventually go away and that we all can one day hopefully enjoy a world where a lot of these scourges are no longer visited upon us. You know, a key deliverable, actually, let me back up on that. I just keep looking at David Crane. I just have to say, not long ago, David Crane invited me to Chautauqua New York, to participate in an event that he organized. And if you don't know David Crane, he was fundamental in bringing together the tribunals in Sierra Leone a few years back. And to my mind, he's also a titan in this world. But David Crane was able to bring together a lot of people to talk about how we were going to address these issues of human rights. And I was grateful to be up there, because when I was up there, I met Brandon Silver. Brandon, you're in the audience. Where are you? There we go. He works, of course, with Professor Cotler. And Brandon and I talked a lot about how we were going to try to approach this. And again, it's this community of people getting together to solve these problems. And I think that's going to be critical going forward. Not only we look at the close fight in Gaza, but also, I would say, in stopping this problem writ large overall. Recently also, the Canadians passed the Declaration Against Arbitrary Detention in State-to-State Relations. In doing such, Canada has shown leadership in bringing together 74 countries that are intent upon stopping the taking of hostages and used as political bargaining chips. And recently, I'll also say Canada showed some more leadership in hosting an event at the UN General Assembly in New York, where about 40 foreign ministers got together and again decried this act as just a horrific event. So the long and short of it is, today we are addressing some very huge problems. And to us, I would say that it's critical. It's on the TV. It's what I'm going to go wrestle with the very second I leave and open up my phone and see all the messages that are covering what's happening in Gaza. But we can't lose sight that the only way that we make a lot of these problems go away is to pull together, work together, and ensure that people around the world can embrace, understand, appreciate, and fight for the dignity of the human, and to really express, enjoy, and cherish our humanity. I would say that's why I'm really grateful to be here to honor someone like Professor Irwin Cotler, who has really dedicated his life to making all of these things happen. I can't say, Katrina, when you asked me to come up here and offer some remarks, I was grateful that you didn't ask me to actually introduce the professor. I think that's a burden that no human being should ever have to bear. If you've seen his bio, it's absolutely incredible. I would say that if Professor, if you didn't exist, we'd have to somehow create you. And maybe I'll end on this note. So I was having a discussion with a distinguished Canadian ambassador not too long ago, and she told me that she'd just come back from a human rights event and had met and had a chance to meet and talk to her lifelong hero. And right there, that's a hook. So I came back before she could say another word, and I said, Bono, George Clooney, was it? And she goes, no, Professor Irwin Cotler. And I would say, Professor, if you were to go into the hallowed halls of the State Department and go up to the Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor, you might find that same reception. It's a place where I would say that you would be treated like a rock star, and I hope one day you can go up there and visit the folks up there. They'd be grateful to receive you. But again, thank you for a chance, Katrina, to address this audience. Thank you for a chance to at least let you know that the Secretary of State and the President are working hard not only on Gaza, but solving some of the larger problems that we're addressing. And Professor Irwin Cotler, it's an honor and pleasure to be in this event with you, and congratulations, sir. Thank you.
Freedom's Council. These words describe a man intimately familiar with the unrelenting, undaunted pursuit of justice, Professor Irwin Cotler. From an early age, his parents instilled in him the value of tzedek, the Hebrew concept of justice. Irwin carried this idea with him and made it the animating force of his life. As an attorney, member of the Canadian Parliament, Minister of Justice, Canada's first special envoy to combat anti-Semitism, and as an international advocate for human rights. Moved and inspired by the example of the heroic Swedish diplomat Raoul Wallenberg during the Holocaust, Irwin has made it his mission to save as many people as he can from miscarriages of justice. In every corner of the world, his dedication to this cause has forced light into dark places and brought strength and power to the powerless, giving voice to the voiceless. When Soviet refusenik Natan Sharansky was jailed in Russia, Irwin fought tirelessly to elevate his case until the Kremlin was forced to act. When Nelson Mandela was silenced behind bars, Freedom's Council was there, advocating for the liberty of South Africa's future leader. When Raif Badawi, a voice for liberalism and tolerance in Saudi Arabia, was persecuted, jailed, and flogged, Irwin's advocacy shone a spotlight on his case and helped ensure he made it out of prison alive. And his work to free the unjustly imprisoned continues. For Iranian human rights lawyer Nasreen Sotoudeh, for Vladimir Kara-Murza, now in a Siberian prison colony, for too many others to list. For Irwin, the pursuit of justice never ends. Whether advocating for political prisoners, speaking out for the vulnerable and oppressed, or combating the scourge of anti-Semitism and Holocaust denial, Irwin is always on the front lines of the fight. The Lantos Foundation is honored to award Professor Irwin Cotler the 2023 Lantos Human Rights Prize, and to welcome him into the family of Lantos Prize laureates, all of whom have carried the noble banner of human rights and fought for justice in unique ways. Among those who pursue justice, Irwin Cotler is, indeed, first among equals.
Good afternoon. What a pleasure it is to be here with all of you today, and I've been so moved by the wonderful remarks of those who went before me. My nephew, who is named for his grandfather, Tomika, is an anglicization of Tomika, which means little Tom in Hungarian. My beautiful and brilliant sister Annette, who reminded us all of our duty to be a light shining in the darkness. Our dear friend, probably our very best friend in Congress, Congressman McGovern, who put it pretty powerfully and simply, nothing will change by itself. It's on us. And of course, our amazing Ambassador Roger Carstens, he so wisely reminded us not only to think about the tactical moment we are in, but the long game of changing the world and changing the systems and structures. And you need to know that those of us who know Ambassador Carstens call him Captain America. So when the event is over, you might want to sneak out into the hallway to see, if he steps into a phone booth, pulls off that suit he's wearing and dashes off, because he's that kind of a guy. But we are all here today to honor the greatest among us today, and that is Professor Irwin Cotler. As we meet today to honor Irwin, my thoughts are drawn to another hero, the Swedish humanitarian Raoul Wallenberg, the man who saved my own father's life in the midst of the horror of the Holocaust in Hungary, and the man who inspired Irwin's life of rescuing prisoners of conscience and hostages around the globe. In many ways, it really was Wallenberg that brought the paths of Tom Lantos and Professor Irwin Cotler together. There is a simple and very powerful memorial to Raoul Wallenberg that sits just across from the United Nations building in New York. It is a sculpture of Raoul Wallenberg's briefcase that sits on cobblestones that once stood in the Budapest ghetto. The first time I saw it, the thought that came into my mind was that it depicted his satchel left behind as Wallenberg hurriedly rushed off on an urgent matter of life and death. Who was he hastening to save? Perhaps it was a young teenage Jewish boy named Tom. But the more I thought about that briefcase left behind in such a hurry, the more it seemed to me to be asking another question, not who he went to save, and posing another challenge. And that question and that challenge was, who would pick it up? Who would pick up the briefcase left behind? Who would step forth to carry on Wallenberg's mission of rescue and hope? Tom Lantos and Irwin Cotler, each in his own way, took up that briefcase. They followed in the footsteps of Raoul and they chose to roll onto their own shoulders the duty to be their brother's keepers. Irwin Cotler has carried that briefcase with extraordinary dignity, determination, intelligence, and integrity for lo these many decades. And it is in recognition of all that he has so nobly carried across the years that it gives me great pleasure to bestow today on him the Lantos Human Rights Prize for 2023. So, Irwin, I'd like to ask you to join me up here.
Thank you, Katrina. I want to begin by expressing appreciation to you, to Annette, to the Lantos Foundation for convening this very moving meeting. It also allowed for the bringing of my family together. We don't always get together in this way, but it's particularly poignant for me because my wife, who's here, has always been in the trenches in this common cause, though not always on the same side, as I've always said in Canada, but a real fighter for human rights. But the greatest blessing for both of us is that our 4 children who are here are all involved in the case and cause of human rights. I'm very, as I said, moved, humbled by this award. I have to say that you've been able to manage secrecy very compellingly. I knew nothing about these video testimonials, and what made them so compelling for me is those who delivered those testimonials, where we are bonded not only in common cause, but in lifelong friendships and in the best of memories in that regard. So I can't tell you how moved I was by them. And to be able to receive an award that is in remembrance of and in tribute to Congressman Tom Lantos. Congressman Lantos was not only an inspirational role model for me, but he was an inspirational role model for all who knew him. Not only the first Holocaust survivor to serve in Congress, sometimes forgotten, he also fought in the anti-Nazi resistance, saved, among the many others, by Raoul Wallenberg, who demonstrated, and we will talk about this, who demonstrated how one person with the compassion to care and the courage to act can confront evil, prevail, and transform history. A lifelong lesson for each and all of us in these very troubling times when Tom Lantos's voice and vision itself is so desperately missing, and which we always have to recall and act upon. And I remember my first meeting with Tom Lantos shortly after he was elected to Congress in 1980. And we met, and one of the first things we discussed was really the message transmitted by Holocaust survivors. As it happened, my first pro bono client in life was the Association of Survivors of Nazi Oppression in Canada. I began to work with them when I was a student. My son was here would say I only had pro bono clients. But those who know my son will know that he has a humbling sense of humor for me. But when we got together, we were called the message of our common mentor, Nobel Peace Laureate and Holocaust survivor Elie Wiesel, who spoke of the Holocaust as being a paradigm for radical evil, of anti-Semitism as being a paradigm of radical hate. And the lesson is to never forget that Tom Lantos acted on that so well. That 1.2 million people were deported to the death camp Auschwitz, the most brutal extermination camp of the 20th century. 1.1 million of them were Jews. Let there be no mistake about it. Jews were murdered at Auschwitz because of anti-Semitism. But anti-Semitism, regrettably and tragically, did not die at Auschwitz. And it remains the bloodied canary in the mineshaft of global evil today. And as we've learned only too compellingly and too well, and I hate to have to repeat it, that while it begins with Jews, it doesn't end with Jews. That anti-Semitism, as my colleague and dear friend Ahmed Shahid put it in his landmark report to the United Nations in 2019 on as he put it, anti-Semitism is toxic to democracies. It's an assault on our common humanity. And it requires a constituency of conscience to combat it. It cannot be combated by Jews alone. And I say this in the shadow of the recent historical inflection moment, which I will get to shortly in my remarks. But in that first meeting with Tom Lantos, we discussed also Raoul Wallenberg, and he launched what then became honorary citizenship for Raoul Wallenberg in the United States, and he inspired me so that Raoul Wallenberg became Canada's first honorary citizen, another joining together in common cause. But it did not end there. We worked together to combat and engage in the two great human rights struggles of the second half of the 20th century. The struggle for human rights, the struggle for Soviet Jewry, human rights of Soviet Jewry, and the struggle against apartheid. And to work with the two political prisoners who became the voice, the face, the identity of those two struggles. Anatoly Sharansky, as he was known then, Natan Sharansky, you saw in the video, where we have become endearing friends. Our families joined at the hip, as they say. And Nelson Mandela, who became the voice and leader of the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa, who himself endured 27 years in a South African prison and emerged to not only preside over the dismantling of apartheid, but to become the president of the first ever democratic, free, egalitarian South Africa. But it took a long time. And I recall in 1981 when I was there with my wife, when just speaking about Mandela could put Langley in prison. And in fact, speaking of Mandela in 1981 did cause me to be arrested, and where I got a glimpse of the courage that Mandela exhibited for those 27 years in the South African prison. And we discussed not only these two struggles, but got involved in political prisoners. And through him, got involved not only in the great human rights struggles, but he also inspired me. It was his words that also inspired me to then become a member of Parliament. We would discuss it. I always said that, being a law professor, I thoroughly enjoyed being a law professor. But when I was asked, what's the difference between being a law professor and being a parliamentarian, I said a law professor is very important, the primacy of education and life, but it is an ongoing seminar. As a parliamentarian, you're in the trenches for human rights. Those of you here know you're making decisions in real time that affect the lives of real people. And that's why I always felt the work of Parliament was so important. I recall, if I may here, my parents of blessed memory, who were my first teachers about human rights. My father took me to visit Parliament when I was 10 years old, and I still remember that. It's come back to me now, etched in my memory. When we came to the Parliament building, he said, "Son, this is Vox Populi. This is the voice of the people." Today, people might look at that as being a mocking refrain, but it was from the depths of his soul that he said, "This is the voice of the people." And then he took me next door to the Supreme Court, and he said, "Son, this is the protector of the rule of law." And then he took me to the tomb of a missing soldier, and he said, "Son, these are those who stand on guard for us here in Canada." And I mention this because we are the anniversary of a terrorist assault on the Canadian Parliament that took place when I was there 9 years ago. And we remember the memory of those who fought off the terrorists at that time, and just yesterday commemorated in Canada. These, historical moments that are converging for me here as we meet. And then finally, there is the World Conference Against Racism in Durban that took place in 2001. I have to say, and I discussed this with Congressman Lantos at the time, that when it was first announced that there was going to be a World Conference Against Racism, I greeted it with great interest, anticipation, and indeed excitement. This was going of the 21st century. This conference was going to have its organizing theme, the combating of racism and hate, which is an assault on our common humanity. But regrettably, and I say this as someone who is at Durban, and where Congressman Lantos headed the American delegation at Durban, and expressed his moral courage in walking out of that conference, because a World Conference Against Racism and Hate turned into a conference, as he himself put it, a conference of racism and hate against the Jewish people. And is forever etched not only in my memory, but in my being. I remember flying back to Canada on September 10th, and then awakening in the morning of September 11th to 9/11. And then with the horrors of 9/11 unleashing themselves, just as the horrors of the mass atrocity of Israel's multiple 9/11 have unleashed themselves. I remember one of my colleagues from South Africa calling me later that day, and I shared this with Tom Lantos, when she said to me that if 9/11 was the Kristallnacht of terror, then Durban was the Mein Kampf. That this is where the blueprint for hate that has metastasized over the last 2 decades has led us. And so I close with this historical inflection moment, which was not planned when the Lantos Foundation was convening this coming together. What I mean about a historical inflection moment is that we are meeting now in the shadow of the worst day in Jewish history since the Holocaust, where October 7th in American terms was a multiple 9/11. I don't like to use that term because I don't want to reduce it to statistics. Behind every murdered person, behind every abducted hostage forcibly disappeared, is a suffering and pained family, community, nation, state, international community joined together in common cause. And I was in Israel with my family on that October 7th. And so the memories of that day as they unfolded are forever etched in my memory. We were about to leave that Sabbath morning for the synagogue. It was to be a particularly festive Jewish Sabbath. It was taking place on the last day of the holiday of Sukkot, which in Jewish tradition is a particularly festive, joyous holiday, where we celebrate not only the forging of the indigeneity of Jewish peoplehood in the desert following the liberation from Egypt, but where we celebrate, that's a holiday in which we celebrate our common humanity. That's a holiday in which we are reminded of our mutual obligations to each other. That's a holiday which is both our Jewish thanksgiving and our obligations to our common humanity. But rather than go to the synagogue, as the air raid's siren sounded, we were ushered into a bomb shelter, as it foreshadowed the launching of 500 rockets targeting civilian population in the first hours of October 7th alone. Let us remember that under international law, and I don't like to deal with sometimes abstractions as a law professor, but in international law, the launching of one rocket targeting a civilian population is a war crime. The widespread and systematic targeting of civilians with hundreds of rockets are a crime against humanity. And let there be no mistake about it. After those first rockets, which was not the first time they were launched, they foreshadowed the worst of mass atrocities, of horrors too terrible to be believed, but not too terrible to... And they unfolded as we were sitting in the bomb shelter, watching it in real time because Hamas was uploading in a celebratory manner the very atrocities that they were committing, which is so horrific when these atrocities in our democracies and in the streets of our democracies are now themselves being celebrated and glorified by some. And so, when we meet now, we know that we meet in the shadow of over 1,400 murdered, of over 5,000 wounded, and of some 220 hostages. These hostages are a looking glass into these mass atrocities. These hostages are a reminder and remembrance of the worst of violations of international human rights and humanitarian law and international criminal law. These hostages are a reminder that what we are engaged in here, regrettably, is not only a terrorist organization like Hamas, and I remind you, it's not only a prohibited terrorist organization under American law and Canadian law. It is a anti-Semitic, genocidal, terrorist government, not because I say so, but because they have said so in their founding charter in 1988 and have affirmed it ever since, calling not only for the destruction of Israel, but the killing of Jews wherever they may be as a religious obligation. They are not only an enemy of the Jewish people,
They are an enemy of their own Palestinian people whom they have held hostage. So there are the hostages abducted and kidnapped in this war, and there are the hostages, the civilians in Gaza, whom they have used as human shields. A double war crime in that regard. A double, ongoing, as we meet, standing crime against humanity. And so we are meeting today here in the presence of Noam, who's come here from Israel to represent the family of hostages. From her kibbutz alone, 73 have been abducted as hostages. The young and the elderly, toddlers and Holocaust survivors, the weak and the disabled. She has come here, as she said, not only because she is their voice, because she represents the family that have been abducted and disappeared, but because she has come here to ask us that we be their voice, that we understand the sense of urgency, that we do what Tom Lantos would have called upon us to do, and his message is so present there, that we must be now the guardians of our common humanity, that we must be the protectors of humanity, that we must come together as a constituency of conscience at a governmental level, at a congressional level, at a civil society level, in common cause, as I said, on behalf of our common humanity, and with this sense of urgency, moral urgency, that Tom Lantos represented in all his life. And the least we can do is act upon that historical inspiration. Thank you.
It's my privilege to serve on the board of the Lantos Foundation, and in conclusion, on behalf of the entire board and staff, I just wanted to say thank you to Professor Cotler for your courage, for your example, for your remarks today. Thank you to all of our speakers for your clarity in a time of confusion, and thanks to everyone here in the audience for the work you do every day to advance the cause of human rights. Thank you for coming.